Manchester City are now winless in 7 games in a row. They currently find themselves in 5th place in the Premier League, 11 points behind leaders Liverpool. They currently find themselves out of the League Cup entirely after losing out to Spurs, and they're 17th in the Champions League on 8 points after 5 games. So, with Manchester City having their own mini crisis, I thought now would be a good time to evaluate Manchester City's squad and what Pep Guardiola needs to do to rebuild it for next season. And quite simply, I've got 29 Manchester City players here, and we're going to go through a keep, sell, loan, and contract exit for every single one of them. And we're going to start off with the goalkeepers and Ederson, who's currently 31 years old. He's got a contract at Manchester City until 2026. And really, when you think about what he's done over the previous years for this club, I really do think that, his contract renewal should be a guarantee. However, he has looked his best in the last few weeks, especially in the last game in the Champions League against Feyenoord when they were 3-0 at Manchester City, ended up drawing 3-3. I think it's a record for at the stage of the game they were at for a team to come back and draw a game in that game. And for me, I think it is one where Ederson, 31, at the end of the season, only got 1 year left on his contract. And I think he was dropped against Liverpool. And maybe there's something going on behind the scenes, I'm not quite sure. But for me, it was one where Ortega is a very decent backup. And actually, his save percentage at 85.7% is better than Ederson's at 62.3% over the course of this season so far. I know Ortega has only played a very small sample size, but in comparison, maybe when Manchester City aren't playing so well, Pep Guardiola decided that, he needs someone who's a better shot stopper than Ederson. Because in terms of when it comes to playing with the ball at his feet, there's no one better than him. But if we're talking about Manchester City and this Pep Guardiola side having a massive rebuild, getting back to where they want to be at the top of the Premier League, at the top of the Champions League, and I do think that Ederson was an interest of speculation from Saudi Arabia in the summer. And so if an offer like that were to come in, I think with Stefan Ortega being, a year older, but still a very decent deputy, that I think they should sell Ederson. I think they could get a fee upwards of 30, maybe 40, probably even 50 million pounds. And I think a club in Saudi Arabia, in the Saudi League, will come and pay that. So I think it is one where maybe Man City now need to look at that defense and going forward, and maybe they need some younger blood. Maybe need someone who's just a better shot stopper, as well as someone who's good at their feet. So for me, Ederson, I think it's maybe a little bit harsh, but I think we should sell. And if Manchester City are going to be selling the number one goalkeeper, Ederson, this summer, then I do believe that they need to keep the second choice goalkeeper in Stefan Ortega, someone like I said, 32 years of age, a year older than Ederson, but someone who, if he wasn't playing week in week out, wouldn't mind, would happily be on the bench, and is a very good deputy, and someone who you could rotate with a new number one, someone who could really help that number one acclimatise to the Premier League. And I think for me, I think Manchester City should maybe keep Ortega and let Ederson go if the fee comes in. And the last of the goalkeepers is Scott Carson at 39 years of age. His contract does expire at the end of the season in 2025. However, it is one where he just seems to be happy to be in and around the squad. Seems a good egg in the dressing room, and if he wants to stay for another year, then I think you give him that contract. And at the same time, if you don't want him to stay, I don't think anybody can really argue with that either. So if we had to make a decision, let's just say that Manchester City ended up keeping Scott Carson just because he maybe helps out with that homegrown quota as well. I don't think he'd mind, being third choice goalkeeper, not really playing much and just hanging around for the paycheck. And then we're going to move on to the defenders, which is one of the hot topics of discussion. And we're going to start off with the right backs with Kyle Walker, someone who is 34 years of age. His contract expires in 2026. And for me, I have been a huge admirer of Kyle Walker over the last few years. But when we think about it, what he's doing right here, right now, I think Kyle Walker now is past his best, and Manchester City need to go out and sign a new right back. I think it's one where for the last 18 months, maybe he hasn't been at his very best. He'll still be playing at a really great level, but I think in the Euros it really highlighted to everyone watching that maybe he was a little bit susceptible and making errors. And not only that, this season we've seen him beaten by pace by Adama Traore and Timo Werner, two players who are absolutely rapid in his defence, but something we wouldn't normally see from Kyle Walker. And I think that's really highlighted someone that, maybe his time has come, and there's no harm in saying that. So it's up to me. I would be selling Kyle Walker. Yes, one of the Premier League's best ever right backs, along with Gary Neville, probably depending on what time period you were born in and what time period you were watching football. But I do think now it is the time that Man City do move on. And the other right back at Manchester City at the moment is Rico Lewis, 20 years of age. A contract expires in 2028. And for me, this is a no-brainer. He's an absolute keep. Yes, he may not have been in great form so far this season. I think he started off really well, but tailed off. But so is the entire Manchester City side. And not only that, when he's playing right back, defensive midfield, centre midfield, right wing, he's playing absolutely everywhere and expected to cover for his teammates who are more experienced, better players, and should really be carrying the load. He's been expected to do that. And I think that's a credit to his temperament and his qualities as well, and what Pep Guardiola sees in him. But I think for the moment, maybe take him out of the side, let him gain his confidence again, and then bring him back in. But it's a no-brainer. At 20, he's clearly the future for Man City, an absolute keep. Next, we're going to move on to the centre backs. I'm going to start off with Ruben Diaz, 27 years old, and the contract expires in 2027. Someone who, for me, is in the prime years of his career at the moment, and is actually, in my opinion, Manchester City's best defender. I think he's a great leader. He's got great defensive organisation of that entire back line, and he's the best box defender at Manchester City. And for me, this is a no-brainer. He's the one that should be starting, and if it wasn't for just a couple of niggles here and there, I think he would be starting week in, week out. Then that brings us on to Manuel Akanji, and I think this is quite an interesting one because he's 29 years of age at the moment. His contract also, like Ruben Diaz, expires in 2027. But when you think about the amount of money the Manchester City bought him for, £15 million from Borussia Dortmund, what an absolute steal that was at the time. When you think about that, you're going to need maybe a potentially huge new rebuild, especially in that midfield, which we're going to be coming on to. Could this be an area where they potentially go about and selling someone like Manuel Akanji? In my opinion, I think Manchester City would probably keep. But if they were to get an offer of maybe 30 million and upwards, they could sell, make a huge profit and use that to reinvest in the rest of the squad. I think it's very interesting, and I think Manchester City, if they were to get an offer, would really seriously consider it. But it's up to me. I think, you know what, when you think about the fact that Pep Guardiola loses him in the entirety of the back line, right back, left back, in centre back, in midfield sometimes as well, the way he inverts on the wide areas or where he steps into midfield from the centre back positions, I do think that just for now you can get rid of the entire squad. So I would keep Manuel Akanji just for now. So if we're going to keep Manuel Akanji in the side, then I do really think we need to be looking at one of the other two centre backs and thinking about, you know, who are Manchester going to sell to try and reinvest in that squad, try and improve the defence next season. And you look at John Stones and look at Nathan Ake, and maybe this is a little bit controversial, but I think I'm going to sell John Stones. Because for me, there's no doubt about John Stones' quality, but the only issue is he's not consistently fit. When you look about the amount of times that he started in the Premier League, he only started above 30 times in the Premier League in the 2015-2016 season, and that wasn't even for Manchester City, that was for his previous club, Everton. And when you look about it 2 seasons ago in the Premier League, John Stones started 21 matches. Last season, it was only 12, and this season from 13 games it's only been 3. So it does look like his minutes are waning and it is getting less and less, and I don't think you can do anything about it. It is injuries, but I do think that, you know, with his contract expiring in 2026 and he's 30 now, I think Manchester City could potentially move on from John Stones and find some other avenue to go down in terms of defenders. Then we come into what for me is a real no-brainer, and that's Josko Gvardiol, who is 22 years of age. His contract expires in 2028. And for me, you know, when you think about it, this season, he scored a couple of goals which maybe matched his defensive frailties, but I think going forward, he's been really, really good. When you think about the fact that he's 22 as well, I think a lot's been expected of him. He starts week in, week out on that left back and left or the left 3 side, sometimes to the left of the attacking front line as well. He really does it all. And when you think about the fact that Manchester City spent 90 million euros for him from RB Leipzig, or 77 million pounds at the time, I do think that it was a large investment, and I think he's going to be a long-term pick. He's got the physicality, he's got the pace, he just needs, you know, maybe a little bit better form at the moment, and the players around him to be doing better as well. But I think for me, this is a very easy keep. Which brings us on to Nathan Ake, who's 29 years of age. His contract expires in 2027. He can play left centre back and left back and do both at a really high level. I don't think he's particularly world class at either position, but I do think he performs really well when relied upon. And actually, I think I'm going to keep him at Manchester City next season, because I do think that in the left back position, he's one of the best one-on-one defenders that Man City have. I think, you know, Mo Salah had, you know, a pretty decent game against Manchester City on the weekend, but still Salah didn't really have too many chances, and that's because of the fact that Nathan Ake did a really good job on him. I think he's mobile, he's really good on the ball, and he can get up and down as well. And I think at 29, with a couple more years left on his contract, he's going to be absolutely fine. So for me, I'm going to leave him just because of the fact that you can't get rid of everyone in one summer. And the final Manchester City defender is 21-year-old Joshua Wilson-Ebrand, who does turn 22 on Boxing Day. The left back for Manchester City is in their youth squad and their elite development squad. Last season, he was on loan at Stade de Reims and did really, really well. But I think for me, this is one where, you know, with Man City having a very porous defence, if they needed him, then they maybe would have used him a bit more than they have. He hasn't played a single minute so far this season. And when you consider the fact that he's 21, going to be 22 before January comes around, if he's not breaking into this Manchester City side now at his age, I don't think he really ever will. So for me, it's got to be a sell. And while the defence is a very hotly debated topic at the moment, I think the midfield is the key area of concern for Manchester City. And we're going to start off with, of course, Rodri. The 28-year-old has a contract till 2027, and he is the current Ballon d'Or holder as well. And if it wasn't for the fact that he had his ACL injury, I don't think this would even be a debate. But when he comes back, he's going to be 29. Who knows how long it's going to take him for him to rediscover his perfect form, the one he was in before he got his injury. But if we're being honest, he is still absolutely a keep. I think we've seen how much Manchester City miss him, what a great influence he is on the squad around him. I think, everyone looks worse for him not being in the side. And I think it's one where, Manchester City are probably out of the title race just based on the fact that Rodri's out for the whole season, and the fact they have no one of his profile to even deputise for him, I think was a really big mistake going into the season. So Rodri, yeah, despite the injury, still 100% a keep. And then next up, we have Ilkay Gundogan. The 34-year-old's contract does expire at the end of this current season, but he does have an option in it to extend till the 2026 season if Manchester City decide to activate that clause. And I think this is where it gets really, really juicy, because if you're talking about needing a midfield rebuild, Ilkay Gundogan is the oldest Manchester midfielder at the club at the moment at 34 years of age, and the next one oldest behind him is Kevin De Bruyne at 33, which we'll come on to next. But I think for Gundogan, when he left Man City, I think they really wanted to keep him for another season. He went to Barcelona, had a fantastic time there, and then they came back. So I think the plan was always for him to not play as many minutes as he has done so far this season. He's played over 1,000 minutes just in the Premier League alone so far this season. And I think the Rodri injury has obviously meant that he's played a lot more than it was intended. I think he was intended to come back into that squad, be an experienced leader, and then, come on in games in the last 10 to 15 minutes to try and see it out with his experience. And not only that, play and start in some rotated games where the team's a bit disjointed. There's some younger players, some fringe players, and really be the player who captains the side out in one of those games and knits it all together. And that hasn't quite been the role that he's been able to play because, like I said, because the injuries, not only to Rodri but everyone else in the midfield, and the fact that he's had to play so many minutes, sometimes not in his preferred position. But if we're being brutally honest, I think that his legs have gone a little bit, and I think he has been overexposed in the fact that he's played too many minutes, and that's not his fault. But I do think it is time for Man City to maybe move on, because even if they were to renew his contract, he's only going to be leaving on a free in a year's time after that anyway. And so is he worth keeping around on his wages? I think at this point, probably not, and they should probably let Ilkay Gundogan go on a contract exit at the end of the season. And that brings us on to one of the biggest talking points in this entire video, and that player is Kevin De Bruyne, who's 33 years of age at the moment, and his contract expires at the end of this current season. What do you do with Kevin De Bruyne? Arguably, I don't even think it can be debated, so I won't even say arguably. He is one of the best Premier League players of all time. Hands down, he has been that good. But now, at this stage in his career, what do you do with him? Because when you think about last season as well, he only played 15 matches, he only started 15 matches in the Premier League, and he did get 4 assists and 10 goals from that. So, when he did play, he was phenomenal. But so far this season, from 13 games, he's only started 4 of them. And I think his injury issues you do have to take that into account, because when you consider the fact that he's reportedly to be the highest paid player at Man City and in the Premier League, with a reported fee of £400,000 a week. If going forward, you can only guarantee that Kevin De Bruyne starts maybe 20 games in the Premier League maximum, is he worth that if he's only going to play half the minutes? And Man City have a huge decision, because it's one where you can talk about a midfield rebuild, but Kevin De Bruyne going forward is still one of the best players at the club and in the league still, in my opinion, when he is fit. But will those injuries hamper him? Will that mean that any time he comes back, will he not be able to come back as explosive as he did, maybe last season against Newcastle away? Will he come back? Does it mean he needs a couple games to get into his momentum? And that mean that, when the games that he is fit, he's not always going to be his best. These are some key issues that Man City are going to have. And it's going to be a really, really tough decision going forward for them. But for me, if Pep Guardiola has 2 more seasons and that's it after this one, then I do think that you may as well cut your losses straight away. Sell Kevin De Bruyne and let him go at the end of the season for a contract exit and a free transfer. Then that means that you have 2 seasons of Pep Guardiola with this new squad, and let him, try and figure out how to get the same attacking numbers from other midfielders who can replace Kevin De Bruyne. So for me, I would let him go on a contract exit at the end of the season, and it's a very difficult decision because he, like I said, he is undoubtedly one of the best Premier League midfielders ever, but I do just think it's maybe time that Man City move on from him. And that very nicely brings us on to someone who's in the current Man City squad who could potentially replace Kevin De Bruyne, and that's Phil Foden, the 24-year-old. His contract expires in 2027, and it's one where he was voted the PFA Player of the Year last season, and I think, arguably he was one of the best players in the league last year. I personally would have given it to Rodri, but I don't begrudge him for getting that honour last year, because he was one of the players who did deserve it if it were only to be one. I think the summer he had at the Euros with England England really did a number on him in terms of him playing out of position. England getting the results but not necessarily playing well as a team, and him getting a lot of the criticism for that. Didn't have a proper preseason. Come back into the Premier League side with Man City and not really have a good preseason. The team not performing well either. And I think his confidence has taken a massive blow. No goals and only 1 assist so far in the Premier League. And it is one for me where when you get the PFA Player of the Season last year, I expect you to kick on and do the same again. And last season I was really thinking about, maybe Man City won't miss Kevin De Bruyne if he's out injured. Maybe, Phil Foden is the answer for the here and now. But this inconsistency is really, changing my mind about it. Should Man City go out and buy someone else to be their Kevin De Bruyne replacement? Because I'm not necessarily sure that Phil Foden can be it. Can he do it consistently? 30 games in the Premier League and the Champions League as well at the highest level. He's won 6 Premier Leagues. He's got the experience. He's a great age now. He should be really kicking on. So why hasn't he? But with all that being said, he has come to the youth system. He is a phenomenal player, and I really do hope that he fulfills his potential and becomes one of the best players in Premier League history ever, because he absolutely has the ability to do so. So yeah, it's absolutely a keep for me. Next up then is Bernardo Silva. The third-year midfielder's contract expires in 2026, and I think this is a really crucial season for Bernardo Silva because he's eternally being linked with a move away from the club, either it's to Barcelona, to Real Madrid, to Saudi Pro League, wherever it may be. He's eternally linked with a move away, but then always ends up staying. And when you think about it so far this season, 13 Premier League games gone, 11 starts for Man City, and in the 2 games where he hasn't started, he's come on as a substitute. So clearly, he's very beloved by Pep Guardiola. Not only in that midfield, he sometimes plays out on the right wing as well. And I think it's one where if you don't sell Bernardo Silva, you have to give him a new contract. And I think that could be a potential issue for Man City, because what length of contract are you going to be offering someone who's going to be 30 years at the moment, 31 at the end of the season, and then 32 come time as this new contract comes around? It's a very difficult position to be in if you're Man City. But I think if you're getting rid of Gundogan, if you're getting rid of Kevin De Bruyne, can you really afford to let go Bernardo Silva as well? I'm going to say you can't. So it's not a very concrete keep, but I think for me it is a keep for here and now. And then we move on to Mateo Kovacic. The 30-year midfielder has a contract which expires in 2027. If I'm being completely honest, I think in the fact that Rodri has been missing for the entirety of the season, Kevin De Bruyne has been very in and out, I think about Mateo Kovacic, and I do think that he's the only midfielder that actually stepped up and improved his level so far this season. I think when he hasn't been available, Man City have surely missed him. I think when Rodri hasn't been available, Kovacic has been the best defensive midfielder at the club, and I do think that he could do a decent job there, but he just needs some legs around him. But unfortunately, so do everyone else in the Man City side. With the contract until 2027, I think this is one, like I said, you can't replace the entire midfield. I think Gundogan and Kevin De Bruyne are leaving, that's fine. But for me, I would also keep Mateo Kovacic because he's got a contract until 27, so you've got a couple more years in him left to go as well. And then you've got a player whose Pep Guardiola's use of him so far this season has really baffled me, and that's Matheus Nunes. The 26-year-old has a contract which expires in 2028. And the reason why I say I'm confused by Pep Guardiola's use of him is because when you talk about what Man City are missing in the midfield right now, they're missing physicality, a bit of recovery run, they're missing that drive, that energy. And I do think that Matheus Nunes has all of that in abundance, and I'm surprised at the fact that Pep Guardiola isn't using him more in the midfield and shoving it out on the left-hand side, because to me, he can play there, yes, but that's not his best position. I think his best position is in the midfield, and he's got that physicality, so let him use it. I do think, though, that ball retention is something that Pep Guardiola looks at, and he's very important to him and his style of play and his team. And so I think with Matheus Nunes, while still having a very good ball retention, pass accuracy rate of 85%, he does look at the likes of Ilkay Gundogan on 93%, and Bernardo Silva 91%, and think, do you know what, maybe Matheus Nunes just gives away the ball a little bit too cheaply in the midfield when he does play there. But for me, I think it's someone who Pep Guardiola should be using more often in that midfield. So I'm going to be keeping Matheus Nunes, but I wouldn't be surprised if Pep Guardiola decides that, you know what, he might sell him because he's not quite the player that he fancies. But for me, when you think about it, if you can't spend any money this January and you can't make any transfers, playing Matheus Nunes in midfield, it seems obvious to me. Maybe I'm wrong on that. And then we've got a couple of Man City youngsters who I've been a little bit disappointed that I haven't seen more of under Pep Guardiola. If Man City's midfield is struggling, I want to see maybe some youngsters give some youthful exuberance into that midfield, the energy and the passion. Let them maybe go with it and see if, they can do something with that. And I don't think Pep Guardiola really trusts any of them, but one player I really do like, and I've liked for a little bit of time now is Nico O'Reilly at Man City, the 19-year-old midfielder. He's someone who's only played 10 minutes in the Champions League so far this season, but I do think has a very promising future. And I actually think he's doing really well at youth development so far. So for me, I think I want to see him go out on loan and get some more minutes before I can judge whether or not Man City need to keep him in the long term. And another Man City youngster is Jacob Wright, the 19-year-old midfielder, as well as there have been calls for him to start in the Premier League because he's made 2 appearances for Man City in the senior team last season, 2 appearances so far this season, and it is one where they're constantly on the bench, they're constantly in and around the first team squad, and if the midfield isn't working, you may as well give some youngsters a go, because what's the worst that can happen? You just say they're not quite ready, okay, they move back to the bench and the youth team. So again, Jacob Wright, I think for me, it's one where I want to see him again on loan. I want to really see him, go out there, show how good he is, and then maybe, we can talk about him being in the Man City squad, maybe not next season, but the season after. And one player who we can talk about next is James McAtee at 22 years of age. His contract expires at 2026, who I was really, really looking forward to watching this season play some more football, but he's only played 332 minutes, and this comes on the back of going on loan to Sheffield United last season. Sheffield United, who were obviously relegated and were really, really poor, but he did get 3 goals and 3 assists, and his all-round play did really, really good. I saw McAtee in a couple of preseason games for Man City, and I did think that, maybe they could keep a hold of him, maybe they got the player. They did end up keeping a hold of him, but he hasn't played as much as I would have liked, especially, like I keep saying, with the midfield issues and with the fact that some of the wide players haven't quite been there so far this season. I would have liked to see him play a little bit more. But similarly to what I said about Wilson Ebrand, who is going to be turning 22, if James McAtee at 22 can't get into his Man City side right now, then I do believe that he probably maybe never will. So I do think it's one where Man City sell him. I do think there's a good player in there. There's a good solid Premier League player in there as well, but maybe not at the very highest level, at least not at Manchester City. And then we're going to talk about a couple of loanees at Man City. First of all, starting with Maximino Perrone, who's a 21-year-old and his contract expires in 2028. He's currently on loan at Como. He started the first 7 games of the season, had 1 substitute appearance, and then unfortunately has been injured, but he's one who plays in the central midfield and defensive midfield as well. And if you're talking about the fact that Rodri got injured, maybe he's one that could have come in and done a decent job for them. And he was doing alright before he got injured, but for me, I think maybe it's one where he needs maybe another loan and then he's ready to come into this Manchester City side. And the last of the midfielders before we move on to the forwards is Calvin Phillips, who's on loan at Ipswich Town at the moment. The 29-year-old's contract expires at Man City in 2028, and that I think is a big issue because Man City clearly don't like Calvin Phillips. Pep Guardiola clearly doesn't like Calvin Phillips and they wanted to ship him out for a little bit of time now. Last season, in the second half of the season, he went on loan to West Ham. Didn't go as well as I thought it would. This season he's on loan at Ipswich and he's starting and doing alright, coming on and substitute appearances here and there. He's not necessarily starting week in week out, and at 29 now, it is one where you probably need to move him on. Whether Pep Guardiola and Man City can do that, it remains to be seen, but you can't fool me. Regardless of what Pep Guardiola says about how hard he trains, how great he is as a person, he just does not fancy him. So for me, Calvin Phillips absolutely has to be a sell. I think that's a sign that work on paper at the time was meant to work and be the deputy for Rodri, but it just hasn't worked out. And now to the forward line, I'm going to be starting off with Savinho. The 20-year-old Brazilian has got no goals so far this season after his €40 million move from Girona to Man City, which was a £30.9 million move. It hasn't quite worked out, but I think we can all see, especially, in the way that he plays and carries the ball, that he's a very, very talented player. And the goals will eventually come. It's his first season in England. It's the first season at Man City. I think it's just about giving him a little bit of time. I think it will come good for him. So not necessarily maybe a starter week in, week out. Maybe it's one that he needs to be rotated, but he is absolutely a keep. And his fellow wired man, who in my opinion is struggling as well at this moment, is the 22-year-old Jeremy Dogu, whose contract expires in 2028. Last season, he got 3 goals and 8 assists in the Premier League. And so far, he's only got 1 goal and 1 assist. And I think similar to Savinho, we can all see he's very talented, but it's an end product which needs a little bit of sharpening. I think with Pep Guardiola still staying at Man City for another 2 seasons after this one, I think that that refinement in his game will come. And again, he is a keep. He may not necessarily be starting week in, week out, but once he gets that refinement in this game, once he gets that end product, he is going to be one of the best wingers in the world. And I do really hope that both of them get there because you can see the potential that they both have. It's absolutely incredible. And the next player is Oscar Bob, the 21-year-old Norwegian international, has a contract which expires in 2029, and he hasn't played so many minutes in this Premier League season because of the fact that he suffered a leg fracture in training, not even in a match at the start of the season, which meant that his minutes have been limited so far, and the fact that he probably won't return this calendar year and he probably only return next calendar year. But not only that, he probably need to go through a pre-season, testing of the leg and everything else to make sure he's 100% fit, which is a real shame because this looked like it was going to be his breakout season. He was going to start in week out and make that right wing position his own. but he is also going to be a key for me. And I think Man City have really, really, really talented wide youngsters who are going to be the future of the club. Savinho, Doku, Bob, and I think they will carry Man City. Unlike, in my opinion, the next player, and that player is 29-year-old Jack Grealish, who's got a contract at Man City which expires in 2027. And this is a really, really weird one. Again, a little bit similar to Matheus Nunes, because of the fact that Matheus Nunes is playing out regularly on the left-hand side. And I think to myself, he's doing an okay job, but start Jack Grealish. You paid £100 million for him from Aston Villa all those years ago. Use him. He's got the talent. He's in his prime right now. He doesn't need any more potential. He's in his prime. Use him, tell him what you need him to do, and let him go out there and express himself. And I think that's been very, very disappointing, is the lack of flair, the lack of consistency in terms of what we've seen from Jack Grealish. What we know he can deliver, what he has done for England and Aston Villa previously. It is one where, when you think about maybe the 2021 Euros, everyone was saying, you have to start Grealish, you have to start Grealish. And that feels like such a long, long time ago now. And it is one where, in my opinion, if you're only going to start him 6 games so far this season in the Premier League and the Champions League, why, keep £100 million player on the bench? Let him go, get some money for him, let him reinvest in that into the squad. And I think from an England fan, I really want to see Jack Grealish start games of football, because I think he can absolutely be a shoo-in on the left-hand side for England. And not only for England, when you think about the young players that Man City have in Savinho, Doku, Bob, they're all youngsters who are a bit inconsistent, a bit hit and miss. And, once a moment they could be great, one moment they could be really down. Jack Grealish is in his prime. I've said it, he's in his prime. Start him week in, week out, and I just cannot understand the use of him by Pep Guardiola. I think it's a similar one. I'm not sure he really fancies him, if I'm being honest. And so I think at this point, I think Man City, like I said, need to reinvest in that squad, and then maybe Erling Haaland is someone they need. He needs a little bit of help in those attacking areas. And so for me, I would be selling Jack Grealish, just so Man City can get some money out of him. If it was up to me personally, I think I probably would keep him and I would use him, but I'm not Pep Guardiola. I can't see Pep Guardiola using him, so I have to put him in the sell column. And then that finally brings us to the big man, Erling Haaland, 24 years of age, contract which expires in 2027. And although while Man City have not been great in the last few weeks, and neither is Haaland, I do think when I look at him, 12 goals in the Premier League, 5 goals in the Champions League, 17 goals in all competitions so far this season, he's absolutely doing a job in terms of the fact of getting the ball in the back of the net. However, I do have some criticism of him, because I do think that for the world-class player that he is, he can be delivering more and giving more to the Man City side. When you think about the fact, I think his hold-up play could be better. I think he could run the channels a bit more often. It does mean that Man City have to find him in those channels with good, decent balls. But I do think they're capable of doing that. I do think Haaland should be more capable of doing that. And I do want to see his all-round game develop a little bit more. Because while it's good being a finisher, and that's great if he's getting the goals in the right positions and he's putting them away. But if he's not finishing and he's not getting goals, what else is he doing in the game of football? When you look at that Liverpool-Man City game on the weekend, like I said, yes, Virgil van Dijk had a great game, and yes, he's one of the best defenders in the world. But I do expect Haaland to at least cause him a little bit more trouble. I do expect Virgil van Dijk to be on his toes a little bit. But I do think that Haaland made it easy for Van Dijk. I don't think he's bullying him enough. I don't think he's using his body enough. I don't think he's running the challenge enough. And I want to see more from Erling Haaland. And maybe it is a case of, Haaland needs some more attacking players around him. Maybe he does miss someone like Julian Alvarez. But obviously, in terms of, what we're talking about right now, keep, sell, loan, contract exit, of course, Haaland is a keep. You can't just sell the best finisher in world football. But I do want to see more of him, because I do think that he's able to elevate his game even further. And so there we have it. There is my keep, sell, loan, and contract exit for this entire Manchester City squad. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree? And I'm sure there'll be something you disagree with. So let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one.